good evening. Welcome to the Springford Area School District Board Meeting. Today is November 25th. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Springford Board of School Directors believes the community has the right to bring before the board issues and concerns they may have about items on the agenda or about items in general which affect the district or their children. Because of this belief and philosophy, the board will schedule a time at the beginning and conclusion of every meeting to have an opportunity for community members to share their concerns with the board. At the start of the meeting, members from the public may comment on agenda items only. The school board will move through the meeting agenda, then at the end, when prompted, there will be a time for public comment. This meeting is being filmed to be broadcast on community cable channels and online. Individuals intending to make public comments should be aware that they are being filmed. Speakers will be asked to state their name and the area in which you reside before your comment.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Mrs. Bickert, could we please have a roll call?
Yes, in attendance is Mrs. Deerdorf, Mr. Lackey, Dr. Sharma, Mrs. Weingarten, Mrs. Westwood, Dr. Wright. Mrs. Hermans is on Zoom, and Mrs. Goldsmith and Mr. Jackson are absent.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jackson may be attending a little late, but we will see. So with that said, we'll move on to announcements. So obviously to those in the room and watching on Zoom tonight, a couple of announcements to make sure that we are all aligned. I will be leading the board meeting virtually, and the overall flow of the meeting will remain the same. My microphone will be muted when I am not speaking to minimize any potential feedback, and I will have the same view and audio feed as the live stream. There is a 1-second delay from the boardroom to Zoom, but from Zoom to the boardroom has no delay. So as a result, if any questions are directed to me, you might just have a slight pause before I respond. So I appreciate your patience and cooperation as we facilitate tonight's meeting. Mr. Rizzo, do you have any announcements?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to public to be heard, and this will be on agenda items only. So if there is someone that wishes to speak, please approach the podium with your name, township of residence, as well as the agenda item for which you are referencing.
At this time, Ms. Hermans, nobody's approaching the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. So with that said, we'll move on to our first presentation of the night. And I believe we are going to be making a calling an audible here and rearranging the order. So we're first going to welcome Mr. James Fink, our CFO, to present the 2025-26 proposed preliminary budget.
Thank you very much. That's rattly. Okay, so we're going to talk about the preliminary budget. And for those of you who haven't been attending, I'm just going to try to go back to the beginning here. Here we go. Okay, so for those of you who weren't in Finance Committee, we did go over this in not great detail, but certainly we talked about it a bit. So we know exactly where we are, and we also understand that to be in compliance with Act 1, there is a legal requirement that we do a proposed preliminary budget at about this time each year, and it needs to be understood, of course, that there is a lot of work that needs to get done between now and when we adopt a final budget. So for our agenda, we'll go through the budget timeline real quick. I know we talked about it previously. We'll talk about the challenges, which are usually about the same this time of year, and we'll go into some of the highlights of the preliminary budget as we see them so far. So the timeline, we're doing this presentation tonight, so we're in compliance with Act 1. We will, of course, once we do this, we will publish and advertise the preliminary budget that we're supposed to do on our website. And we will, when we return in January, at the meeting on the 21st, we will adopt the proposed preliminary budget, and that'll get the clock ticking once again. We'll also look to apply for referendum exceptions, just again another tool to have in the toolbox. If for some reason we need to go over the index, we haven't since I've been here, but it's always good to have the tools in the toolbox. The goal, of course, as we've discussed many times in recent years, is to have a final budget adopted by the end of May, so at that May meeting. The purpose of that is to give the business office, my staff, and the tax collectors enough time to get all of their work put together and tying out the tax invoices and all those types of stuff. We are required by law to have it done by June 30th, so we're giving us a little bit of leeway there. So let's jump in to look at some of the challenges that we have about this time of year. So like I said, this is, we're early in the process right now. So we're 4 months into our fiscal year, as of the end of October, which is, the numbers that we can analyze. Only 2 months really into operations since school has been in session. So we're still really at the very beginning to see what kind of traction we're getting on the 24-25 budget, let alone looking at a 25-26. We don't expect, of course, to be out of line with our budget, but you can see there's not a lot of runway to look at. So that's always a big challenge. The other one, of course, as it always is as of late, is understanding what Harrisburg is going to be doing at the state level. This past year, they didn't approve their budget till after that deadline, and there were a number of things that were unexpected in that budget too. So we don't know what that's going to look like at this time. We will get a better flavor of that in February when the governor does his proposed budget. That's the February-March timeframe. So we'll get at least an idea of what's on the table, and then we'll probably hear some reaction from the legislature shortly thereafter. It'll give us an idea at least of what folks are thinking about. But until then, we have to be a little bit careful about what we put into our numbers and really just base it on trend more than anything else. So let's look a little bit closer into both sides of that ledger. So we're going to look at the expenditure side first. Not atypical. Every year, wages, benefits, all those types of personnel costs, normally about 70% of our budget. And that's no exception here. So what we're looking at right now is we're looking at wages of about 41% coming in. Professional wages is going to increase. Remember, we just did the new agreement with the teachers union this past year. So looking at those numbers, again, it's as it exists right now with the with the numbers that we have, about a little under 8% increase there. Administrative support about 5.5% increase there, and some things we put in our model just to look at growth on the personnel needs, how they changed over the years. We could see there's probably about, let's call it $1 million in those numbers above, split pretty evenly between professional and admin support. Admin and support, sorry. Obviously, the taxes and benefits, they're driven by the wages, so that's an easy formula to figure out. The PSERS we're estimating, as I haven't gotten the numbers yet from the PSERS board, it was 33.9% of payroll. So you can see a third of the wages that we have go into retirement. That's quite a nut. But we're expecting somewhere around a 34 to 35% change from the 33.9 to the 34.7 as far as the contribution goes. Health benefits, not sure there. We've gone through an upswing on health benefits as we've discussed in finance the past number of years. We did get Mrs. Lisa and I did sit down with Rischini, our advisor, to look at first look numbers, which are normally very high, and they were very high when they came in. So we'll see what happens when we do our second look, which is usually in the March timeframe. Typically, their first look is higher than their second look. Since I've been here over the past 10 years, last year was the only year that the second look actually came in higher. So we're looking at that piece as well. Other non-personnel related expenditures, we're looking at, special education services are always increasing at Spring-Ford. We know what our debt service is looking like. That's an increase of about 1.3 year over year. And the one big thing I want to point out is the curriculum decreasing about $1.25 million. And that's not necessarily a decrease in the overall budget. It's a decrease on the expense side of the budget, and then there'll be a comparable decrease in the funding side of the budget as we move money out of the savings to pay for those peaks and valleys that we have each year. So I don't want Mrs. Gardy freaking out back there. I think she's okay. We talked about it before, so she's fine. So if we look at it all inclusive, you're looking at salaries. You could write down the line. So the number, of course, that I look at mostly, of course, is where many eyes go to, which is all the way to the bottom right, where we're looking at a total of about 11.5 million change, which is about a 5.5% increase year over year, budget to budget. That is not terribly out of line with where we have been in the past. Normally it's 3, 4, 4.5, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that's not a big surprise at this time in the process. If we look quickly at the revenue side of the ledger, modest changes here. So we have a real estate tax. Usually it's increasing organically around the 1.5% area, which is where we have it on the preliminary budget currently. One of the big things, at least on the decreasing side of it, is interest earned. We're expecting that to go down as interest rates are coming down currently. So we're expecting a drop there. The Fed is still talking about 5 or so interest rate declines over the next year. So we're expecting that to have somewhat of an impact on that. This on the state side of things, again, like I said, a modest increase we put in there. And that's budget to budget. That's not actual to budget. That's budget to budget. And one thing that's probably very good to note is while at the end of this past budget cycle at the state, there were a number of, as we talked about earlier in the year, there were a number of appropriations made that we were not expecting. My sources are telling me they're likely one-timers. So we need to be very cautious as we plan one-time expenditures towards ongoing operating expenses. That's a very, very, I always caution the administration and the board on that. Another thing that's happening, we do have some debt rolling off, so that's going to decrease our PlanCon number. That's at the bottom. The PSERS and FICA, again, that's driven solely by the wages. So as those increase, and if the PSERS percentage increases, so does that number. If I look at the revenues collectively, so again, I like that bottom right stuff, and usually in the percentage areas where I'm looking. So we're looking at there about a 1.5% of organic growth versus that 5.5% growth on the expense side. So that's where those gaps have to be figured out. And that's what we'll be doing over the next few months as we sharpen our pencil and get things rolling forward there. So if I compare the two, at least at this stage in the game, do you like those graphics? Those are pretty cool, right? Yeah, I did that. Not bad for an accountant. So as I compare the the revenues versus the expenses, what it tells me right now is there's a shortfall of about $11.1 million. If I were to put that into what type of tax impact that would be about just under 8%. The index this year, I'm just going to roll that forward because it actually has that number on there. The index this year is 4%. So you see, we have to look at least, and I say at least, half of that 11 million needs to be tightened up. So as we go out to and put our board books together, we start talking turkey with those guys about what they're looking to do. And how we're looking to move forward with some of those things. That's when some of that comes off. And of course, in addition, we offset too, depending on what the state does on the revenue side. That's going to be another big factor. So I know this is relatively brief, but again, I like to stress at this point, and I'm looking at Mrs. Deerdorf as I say this is a check mark. We're doing this presentation and we're adopting our preliminary budget so that we can move forward in the process in accordance with the Act 1 law. The other thing that I'll quickly point out is referendum exceptions. The quick math that we did on that shows that there's maybe $1.5 million if for some reason we had to go over that 4% index that we would be able to utilize. I don't think that that's where we're going to go, but again, keep every tool in the toolbox that you have until it's all figured out in the end. So moving forward, of course, we'll do a deep dive into the expenses. We'll go bottoms up down to the ground level and work our way up. We'll file for the referendum exceptions, as I discussed. We'll adopt the preliminary budget at the January 21st meeting, and then we'll be keeping a very close eye on what happens in Harrisburg, at least get the feel for where that language is going to go and what we think there's going to come out of the state budget. Hopefully we'll be ahead of schedule this year. Not holding my breath. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Fink. So before I turn it over to the board for questions, and I believe someone has their microphone off mute, if you could please mute. Thank you. So before I defer to the board for questions, again, I just want to thank you for bringing this presentation forward. As you mentioned, I know that this is a check the box presentation. It's something that we're required to do per the Act 1 guidelines, but I know that there's a lot of time that goes into preparing this. And for the board, for many of us, this is the second time that we're hearing this, as it was delivered at our public finance meeting earlier the month. So a few things before I turn it over to the board. Number one is I'll make the same comment that I made in the finance committee meeting the other day. This is really the start of our budgetary cycle for the 25-26 school year. And for those that aren't close to public education finance, what I will say is that what you sometimes read in the newspapers. So for example, the other day I saw a local paper that had commented on another school district that said that per their proposed preliminary budget presentation, the school district was eyeing a X% tax impact. I just want to clarify for the community, I have a lot of conviction that there is very little school districts that look to eye the tax impact that is reported during a preliminary proposed budget presentation. This is the number that is out there with no work having been done. So as many of you may be familiar with, the Finance Committee will continue to meet throughout the new year. Budget books will go out to our various departments to understand what are the needs, what are the wants, what are the things that we can give up. And we will look to sharpen our pencils, as Mr. Fink says, and bring that number down to the point where we will be making a final vote before June 30th, but likely in May, our voting meeting in May. So with all of that said, I'd like to defer to the board to see if there is any comment, and I will go off mute.
I have a comment. Can you hear me? So I think a lot of the increases that we have, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Fink, are not as fungible, right? So things like wages, PSERS, et cetera. I am just curious, and I know it's early on in the process, the mindset for folks when we're getting budget books out. What's the guidance that we're giving to folks as they're preparing their budgets for their different departments?
Well, I think Mrs. Herman's kind of hit on that pretty well. They'll go out. We have a starting point of what we had in the budget this year. We'll look at the prior couple of years to see what the spend has been there, to see if there's a need for an increase or a decrease, depending on what activities. I know that if there's program changes, of course, those would go through Mr. Rizzo's office if there's something like that had to happen. But typically, the direction is, what do you need? It not necessarily what are the things that you want is probably a strong word, but really it's about necessity, about keeping programs at the level that Springford wants those programs to be, and that's pretty much where we operate.
So that's what I assumed. I just wanted clarity from you. Thank you.
So talking about that, because with our continued growth and with exactly what Mrs. Westwood had said, a lot of these expenses that are going to lead towards our budget increases for next year can't be eliminated what are some of the strategies that we've used in the past or the plan for moving that gap? Because even though, the index is 4%, which we've talked about before, means that really that is the cap that the state is saying that we can tax without going to referendum. And we are voting tonight to approve or not approve, extending beyond that 4% if needed, that ability. If we intend to stay below that 4%, and we know that some of the expenses that cannot be eliminated, like new staffing, healthcare, what are some of the strategies and things like how do you pursue that where we look to fix that?
Well, I think it's kind of like we said. The budget books are usually the biggest part of it. They'll determine, what programs and stuff are being driven. As far as, we have a debt service that's relatively fixed, right? We know that there's ups and downs from year to year, but they're usually not terribly dramatic. The revenue side is going to be an interesting play. So we're going to, understand, again, like I said, better what the state's going to do. Is Governor Shapiro going to be as generous as he was this past year? We don't know. I don't know what their coffers look like either. But again, there are processes going through. Personnel will go through a process of, what new personnel do we need? What specific personnel do we need for in specific areas? Some that might be have a higher wage structure than others, perhaps, like those types of things. So again, the preliminary budget that we do now is done through a model. It's very formulaic, through a lot of experience and a lot of trends, but trends don't necessarily tell us exactly what the future is. We don't know that until we really start pulling the covers back. I hope that gave you some idea.
It did. And anyone who follows the board at all knows that I don't always approve with the way that we go through the budget process. But I always have great respect for the work that you do and your team does in trying to, bring those numbers down as much as possible. So I just, thank you for what you're going to go through because this is going to be a very challenging year, I think, with that index number being so low and not knowing really what's going to be coming out of Harrisburg and just any increased transparency, I think anybody on the board is willing, on the committees, to stay additional time, put in additional hours, if that's what it takes to be able to talk about what's going on, because I think this is going to be a hard year. And we want to continue to do what's best for our students at Springford. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Fink, do you mind bringing up the Deerdorf slide for me, the one with the dates, I guess, of...
You want that's not the Deerdorf slide
I know,
thought you were going to be talking about.
That's the percentage one.
But that one doesn't come till later, right?
The preliminary Deerdorf slide.
You just want the schedule?
The one with the dates where we talk about the steps where we vote on everything. I think it's probably like the first.
They're way at the front. Yeah. I'm getting there. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the first part of it.
So I just wanted to see if you could clarify for us, because I know that you talked about referendum and then Dr. Wright just talked about referendum. So to be clear about what we're voting for on tonight is to adopt.
We're not voting tonight. We're voting in January. Yeah.
So this is just a presentation on the preliminary budget. We're not voting on it. We're not voting tonight for referendum to go over any sort of number that the tax index is. And it is also a checkbox thing that we do every year for the ref. So if you could just clarify that. I think the board understands that, but I just want to make sure that the public hears it accurately.
Sure. So you're referring specifically towards the referendum exceptions. Is that correct? Yes? Okay. So so the law says that if we're going to go over the index in this case, which is 4%, if we needed to go over that, we would have to go to referendum. In other words, a public vote. However, there are certain areas within that law that allow for exceptions. And the one that we typically qualify for is in special education. So if the basically it's saying that if your special education increases are increasing at a faster rate than the index, you can get an exception just for that piece of the puzzle. And that was the $1.4 million number that I had at the end. So really what's going to happen in January is all you're going to do is authorize my office to go to the state and say, hey, what are they? What do we qualify for, right? They'll send back whatever their letter is. It's probably going to be somewhere close to that number that I put on the screen earlier. And then the board can decide whether or not they want to utilize them. There's nothing that's saying we're doing that. There's nothing that's saying we're not doing that. That would be a board decision to do if we decided to. For some reason, we had to go over that 4% up to that limit.
Thank you for that clarification. I apologize. I was just getting a little excited and thinking we were voting tonight on the referendum, but January. Thank you.
And again, we're not voting
Correct.
to go
It's
to
not
referendum. We're just voting
Correct.
to let my office go to see what exceptions there are possibly out there.
So if I could jump in, because I just want to clarify exactly what Mr. Fink said. There is no voting in November. What we'll be voting for in January is to approve the proposed preliminary budget. We are not voting for any specific tax impact. We will be applying for exceptions in January, for which Mr. Fink will likely come back at our February finance meeting to let us know what is the extent of those exceptions that we could use if we needed them. However, I want to reiterate what Mr. Fink said in the presentation, which is for as long as he has been our CFO, we as a school district have not needed to use those referendum exceptions. I believe the last time that they were used were in the 2012 and 2013, as well as the 2013 and 2014 school years.
So, Mr. Fink, maybe just one last reminder for the public, because I remember we debated this last year about where the audit is located. So for those of us that want to dive deep, and where the proposed budget will be located on our website, in case anyone wants to go into that. And then don't forget, we have our finance committee meetings if you're really interested in this every month in the district office.
Sure. So we'll do the latter first. The proposed preliminary budget will be posted on PDE form 2800, I think it's called, and that'll be posted on the business office's website, or the page on the business office. That's where that will be posted. The audit, when completed, will also be posted there. And as far as the budget goes, the 2028 form, I'm sorry, I said 2800. That form will also have, if someone requests, calls the office, the reception area in the office, we can also have a hard copy up there as well. Okay, I will admit it's a confusing form. You've read it, yeah. But the audit, we are in the final stages of the audit currently. We're just going through any adjusting entries that the auditors are recommending currently. We're also processing our annual financial report, our AFR. So that's getting finalized hopefully before Thanksgiving. The audit will come shortly after that.
And will you be discussing the audit at the results of the audit at one of the finance committee meetings?
Likely in January when we come back from everything. That's, hopefully everything is buttoned up and done by then, so we can have a good discussion about that.
And just to clarify on that, the auditors, as part of what we pay them, will come to the board meetings or to a finance meeting if we chose to have them and present that. The board has decided in the past not to do that. But.
So, Dr. Wright, thank you
think
for
what we
bringing
did
that
last
up.
year. Ooh.
Mrs. Westwood, sorry, I'm on my 1 second delay. If you could mute.
Yeah.
So, just to clarify, this is guided by board policy, and the board policy states that we need to be made aware if the board decides to go further and want the presentation from Mally. We can do that if we find something, if the finance committee finds something in that report that would be concerning. But typically the audit report is simply a qualified or non-qualified opinion. Did we use general accepted accounting principles or did we not? Which is why, as you mentioned, the finance committee did not put forward the recommendation to pay for Mally to come in and present something that was a one piece of paper document and pretty straightforward. But you are right, we have the option as stated in board policy. Mrs. Westwood, was there anything that you wanted to follow up on?
It doesn't cost any more money for that, but that's okay.
Well, we can talk about that in finance. Mrs. Westwood, was there anything else that you would like to follow up on?
You said what I was going to say.
Great minds. Okay, so moving forward, is there any other board comment? All right, with that said, thank you, Mr. Fink, again for presenting. All right, moving forward, we'll move on to our second presentation, and we will be inviting Mr. Sundell to the podium to go through our updated demographic study.
So Ms. Herman, Sundell is in the building. He's just not in the room yet.
Okay.
So do you want to pause for a second? Do you want to move
Yeah.
on and get
If
to
he's
him
in the
after we get
building-
through the business?
If he's in the building, we can, if it's only a minute pause, I'm okay with waiting. And if you prefer differently, we may proceed with the committee reports and then circle back to him for presentations.
You know what, let's do that. Let's do the committee reports.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to go to our committee reports, and we will start with Dr. Wright for the MCIU board meeting.
Thank you. I have not received the notes from the MCIU regarding the minutes from the meeting. I can tell you that we met on November 20th, that we discussed the comprehensive plan for the MCIU, similar as we do here. There was a legislative report, and I assume that we'll have that information from our representative for that, for legislation. And then we also discussed another few things that had to go on with the early intervention. And our next meeting will be January 22nd. Once the minutes from the meeting come through, I will share them with board members and certainly at the next board meeting if there's anything that's relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Mrs. Weingarten for the Western Montgomery Career and Technology Center.
Thank you. The WMCTC Joint Operating Committee met on November 4th. We went through our reports, and the school will be purchasing Parent Square, which I'm sure many people in Springford are already familiar with. Both Springford and Upper Perk currently use this tool, and it works very well, so it makes sense for Western Montgomery to purchase this tool. We're also in the process of updating the website and hope to release that in February, and it will be done a little bit earlier, but they're going to be doing some testing, so we look forward to that. Mrs. Wilson and Mr. Livingood have been working on the budget for 2025-26, and the main addition to the budget is an ask for an assistant principal, among other things. Geyer has posted an online auction yesterday with mainly used auto equipment, since all of the equipment was recently replaced by Hunter. I'm not sure of the details of the auction, but usually Geyer's auctions run for a few days if you're interested in any of the used auto equipment. Mr. Livingood attended the Skills USA Leadership Conference at the Kalahari Resort, and he's been there for the past 5 years. And just to give you some perspective on this, originally we had about five students attending the Skills USA Conference, and this year we are proud to have 51 students attended. It's an intensive time of training, long, hard days, and a lot of work. So it's pretty impressive that we could take such a large group of students there. Our next JOC meeting is at 7 p.m. on January 6th. And for those of you who have attended JOC meetings, it's an honor to announce that Mark Davis, our solicitor, it was his last meeting. He's retiring, and we introduced Beth Shore as his replacement. So I've had the honor of sitting next to him for 2 years, so I'm going to miss the camaraderie there, but look forward to working with Ms. Shore. And I think that concludes the Western Montgomery Career and Technical Center update. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weingarten. Moving on to Mrs. Westwood for the Montgomery County School Directors Legislative Committee.
Yep. So we met, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the specific date. I believe it was 11/3 at 6 p.m. And the next meeting is February 5th at 6. So as a reminder, this group is nonpartisan, but we spent a little bit of time just debriefing the election. We then talked a little bit about E-rate changes. So Mr. Fitzgerald, you probably are familiar with this. I don't think we talked a lot at this table, but this is probably the most interesting thing I'll mention. So for just a little bit of context, the Universal Service Fund, or USF, provides for 4 programs that support internet connectivity. So there's schools and libraries, which is what E-rate falls under. There's low income, which is for home internet. There's high costs, which is expensive to connect areas, I think rural areas, for example. And then there's rural health care, things like telehealth, if you can't get near a hospital or doctor. There's a circuit court case from July that is in the queue to be considered by the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court rules that the Universal Service Fund mechanism is unconstitutional and there isn't an expedient way for Congress to pass legislation to protect and preserve the program, that decision would be, to quote the FCC chairwoman, catastrophically chaotic, as the $9 billion USF funding would dry up, upending connectivity across multiple sectors of the economy. So I think we are hoping that that does not happen, but that is something that maybe, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, Mr. Fitzgerald, but just something that's of interest for us, given that. Other note is that every year we have our legislative breakfast, on maybe a happier note. Though the time is not secure just yet, it will be at the MCIU, which is in Norristown, on April 25th. And that concludes my report, unless there's any other questions or anything you want to add.
I was just going to add, it is a significant problem because I think legally how the fund was established could fall into some trouble based on cases that occurred last year surrounding federal agencies and how they prepare rulemaking without statutory changes. So I do think it will take an act of Congress potentially to resurrect this, short of what I think would be a bad decision, likely from the circuits and or the Supreme Court. So it is something that has been brought up now here at this table, but a lot of districts are very concerned about that E-rate funding. It's a very significant form of revenue for or revenue for districts for such services.
Thank you. Any questions for Mrs. Westwood? Okay, we are going to actually skip over the PSBA report, which normally would be given by Mrs. Goldsmith. Mrs. Goldsmith, the intent of her report tonight was to give details on the delegate assembly that Mrs. Westwood and I attended at the beginning of November, but we will save that for January and to share what the outcome of that was. So moving on to Mr. Lackey, Spring City American Legion.
Thank you. Spring City American Legion Baseball met on Thursday, November 21st at the Royersford Borough Hall. The next meeting will be on Thursday, January 29th. The most notable update for the board is that the fall rehab has been completed. This includes repairs to the infield, mound, and home plate area, as well as resodding of the worn areas of the field. I did want to extend a shout out to Mike Koneski and his team for the great job they've done with the maintenance on the field. What's next on the agenda will be replacing the carpeting in the press box with vinyl flooring and replacing the shades. All of this will be done at no cost to the district. That concludes my update. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lackey, and I can't express how grateful I am to the members of the Spring City American Legion for their support and their partnership in maintaining our facilities. So thank you. Okay, Mr. Rizzo, Superintendent's report.
Thank you. Actually, my report is fairly short tonight. First of all, we have one retiree that'll be on the agenda, Eileen Delenti, Family Consumer Science teacher at the 8th grade center, retiring with 8 years of service here at Springford. I would like to, let's do that we usually. Congratulations for her years of service. A reminder to the board and the community that next Tuesday, not Monday, is our reorganization meeting. Starts at 7 o'clock, and it really is only for that one purpose, and that is to reorganize and to approve our meeting dates for next year. So we will have a lighter admin team present, and then it will be a relatively short meeting. There is no business conducted in January unless there's a need for a special meeting, and you'll see there is a placeholder in December for a meeting if we need to hold it, but generally we usually do not, and then our first meeting is in January with the new board installed, or the new board roles installed. And lastly, I just want to say to the community and to the board, thank you for your work for this year, and I hope you all look forward to a nice break, time off with your families, and look forward to seeing you at the reorg in December and then getting back to work in 2025. That's the end of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Any questions for Mr. Rizzo? Okay, moving on to Mr. Fitzgerald.
And I have no report this evening.
Okay, thank you. So I am assuming that Mr. Sundell is in the room from Sundance Associates.
That would not be a good assumption. How about we continue to proceed and we'll see where this goes? We've seen Mr. Pellegrin come in and leave the room quite a few times to try and meet him, so we'll keep you posted.
Okay, will do. So then we are going to be moving on to the voting portion of our meeting. And as a reminder, we're going to go through this as we typically do. These agenda items were on the work session agenda last week. We had opportunities to ask questions and to comment and have discussion. But of course, if there are any further questions as we vote, please feel free to jump in. So again, since we are doing this virtually, or I am facilitating this virtually, I would just ask that the board in the room please be mindful of coming off mute at those appropriate times, specifically to make a first and second, to make comment, and to cast your vote. Okay? And I will intentionally be going a little slower than I would normally do had I been in the room. So with that said, we'll move on to section 5, minutes, letters A and B. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Moving on to personnel, letters A through H. I will pause for a moment to see if anyone would like to come off mute and separate any items. Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? The motion carries 7-0.
And Ms. Hermans, if I could interrupt for just 1 second. First, I want to congratulate Dr. Jason Hilt, who is here with his family in the back. Welcome to Springford.
Yes, welcome, Dr. Hilt. Looking forward to working with you. Moving on to section 7, finance, letters A through K. Again, I'll give a moment to see if anyone would like to separate any items. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries 7-0. Moving on to programming and curriculum, letters A through C. Again, I'll give a moment to see if there's any separations. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye. I did not hear that. All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? That motion carries 7-0. Moving on to section 9, other business, letter B. A is simply a first read. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries 7-0. Section 10 is informational items with regards to tenure and an Eagle Scout project. So at this point, I would turn it back over to Mr. Rizzo to see if Mr. Sundell is available.
And he is in fact here at this point. So Mr. Sundell, would ask you to come to the podium, and if we could cue up the presentation. And there's a little button right there on the microphone.
Turn the microphone on. Yes, there we go. In the bottom of this, I guess it advances the slide. Yes. So we are here tonight to talk about enrollment projections. That means that we want to look into the future and see where the district might be at a certain point in time. Just as a brief advertisement, I've been doing enrollment projections for about 40 years. I started out as a architect and doing a lot of educational facilities planning, and that included enrollment projections, and started my own firm about 20 years ago now, doing primarily enrollment projections and some mapping exercises for redistricting. And where is this? Okay, there we go. Now I get it. The enrollment projections are really a science. It's statistical analysis, and you're using a systems approach. The method that we use, called cohort survival, is used in about 90% of all the school districts in the United States, including Pennsylvania, who calls it grade level progression. But it's pretty much based on the historic enrollments in the district for the last 6 years and the birth rates for all of the years that move into those 6 years and then beyond. You can make modifications to that standard method if, in fact, there's going to be a lot of new housing coming in, and that would be what they call above the average. If there's been 200 new units of housing over the last 6 years on average, that is built into your cohort survival. If there was now 500 coming, then you can count 300 of them. You have to count what is going to be above the average. Some of that will have been built in, and now there's new, more than usual. We look at these things and we look, is it single-family housing? Is it multifamily housing? What kind of multifamily housing? There's many, many ways to parse the housing as it comes in, and we have them for the number of bedrooms and the number and the building type. Obviously, you know your district well. There's 4 municipalities, 11 schools, and that's the obvious thing that we're looking at here tonight. So the population growth in those municipalities is such that for the most part, you had recent development compared with the rest of the county. Let's say the county was increasing at the highest rate back in the 50s and 60s. You are increasing in these group of municipalities more in the 80s and 90s. In regard to population by age group, we just look at preschool, school age, and then childbearing age, seniors. If you look at those, the blue bar is less than the green bar for preschool, before the kids come to school. That means that there's a decrease between the 2010 and the 2020 census. The same thing was happening with the school age. There was actually a decrease in the number of people within that age group. Childbearing was increasing, but mostly the biggest increases were at the seniors level. This is a chart showing residential permitting. You can see in the past it was quite significantly higher, particularly with the green bars, which are single family, than it has been in the recent past. In the recent 6 years that are the same as the years that we're using as a basis for enrollment, the average has been about 204 units per year. Now, we want to peg that 204 units so that we can see when we look out at the next 5 years, is it above that 204 units? There is a summary in the report showing you where most of the housing is coming from Limerick, with some from Upper Providence, very little to none in Royersford and Spring City. It also gives you divisions between single family and multifamily. So we call up the town officials and ask them what has been approved at the planning board. What do you know is coming before the planning board and hasn't yet been approved? Or what do you know about rumors in terms of big pieces of ground that might in fact develop for housing? So there's a whole list in there. It runs 2 pages. It's by township, and it tells you whether it's single family or multifamily, and it tells you what year it will probably come online, that is, have an occupancy. So what we really find out is there's 28 projects across the 4 municipalities for 2,188 units. That's 475 units for the first 3 years of our 5-year projection. But that is significantly above the average, so we'll look at a percentage that is equivalent to that. Then we're going to say, oh, it's 100 multifamily units here. Well, how many 2 bedrooms? How many 3 bedrooms? And we have distinct multipliers for them. These are how many public school age children would come from that kind of unit. That's the little table on the left there. It comes from Rutgers University, who is the national expert in these kind of multipliers for making this kind of an analysis. So we multiply them out then. All those units that we looked at on the first tables in regard to when they're going to be occupied are now multiplied by a factor. That is something like 0.75 for a single family house, 0.35 for a townhouse. We do all that multiplying out, and we find that the 2,188 units of new housing will yield 719 public school age children. However, we are not going to count all of them. We're only going to count multifamily. The new increases are all in the multifamily segment. The single family, as we know in terms of its projection, is actually a little bit lower than the average of single family. So we're only going to look at multifamily housing. And then, as I told you, we are only going to talk about above that average. The final analysis is that of the 719 new public school age children, we will only add 594 of them to the projection. It's all in the first 3 years. They are the above the average multifamily housing students. Another thing we look at is annual births. You can see in the past, the births were up above 600. Recently, they are at the 470 level. The average over the last 6 years of births. The 6 years that are alongside the same 6 years that we're using enrollment. Everything we look at will be those 6 years. Get all the history based on that. If we look at the enrollment history for the school district, we can see this long rising climb until the pandemic. That little dip that we're seeing probably is pandemic related. And we see that it made a recovery and it's gone back up. There's also numbers in there, and we can see that over time, what used to be like 16% of the population was in the school district, in the public school district. It went higher to 17. Now it's back down at a lower number, 16 or 15. But there's a percentage of population calculation on that chart also. Now, I said that we use cohort survival rates, and I'd like to explain those just briefly. But what it means is if there were 100 births 6 years earlier, and they show up in kindergarten as 106, then your cohort survival rate for birth to kindergarten is 1.06. We will use that in the future as we make a projection. Now, we do that for each grade level. The second one you see, well, the first one you see, births are usually under 100%, under that 1.0 number. And the line will be red when you read these in the report. When we move over to the second chart at the top, that is kindergarten to first grade. Always a number like 116%, 120. Everybody does not come to kindergarten, but they all do have to show up by law in first grade. So we have a very positive number there. There's in fact 13 of those in the report because they go all the way out to grade 11 to 12. I'm not going to go through each one. I want you to understand how they're derived. The chart on the bottom simply shows that if we had a 2020 kindergarten of 435 entering students, they would graduate at grade 12 as 735 students. You do get increases in grade level all the way along the way. These are, again, based on the real, actual, historic counts for the last 6 years. So what have I really said about these loose demographics here? The population is increasing. It is at a consistent rate, and it's kind of low. It's increasing, but low. Remember that the preschool and school age groups were actually getting smaller between the censuses. And that recent 6-year average of births, which everything starts with births to kindergarten, is averaging just under 500, but it used to be up over 600. The recent permitting level in regard to housing is 204 units per year. So we did a future mix and an analysis of 2,188 units, and they are going to be added, the above average, to the enrollment projection, which will be about the equivalent over the 5-year period of about 50 students per grade level. I told you that there was 645 students coming from this new multifamily housing, but we are only going to add the 594. That's the above average count. And then in terms of school enrollment in general, we looked at that long increasing enrollment until the pandemic, but it has recovered. So what are these projections that we make? We do them overall for the district. We do them for the grade level organizations according to your district's organization, and we look at individual school projections. You need to understand they're accurate for 1 to 5 years. The first 1 to 5 years are plus or minus 1% per year. So even that 5th year is about plus or minus 5% accurate. But it's acceptable to all of the state departments of education for this kind of 5-year projection. And the less accurate 6 to 10 year goes the same way, plus or minus 1% per year. So that 10-year projection, which is only in the study for planning purposes, is much less accurate than those 5 years. The enrollment graphs also show what I call district practice capacity. So that's saying here's where your enrollments are, but this is how many of the school can properly educate. There will also be tables year by year, grade level by grade level for each of the projections. And for the elementary schools, we in fact translate that into section counts. How many classrooms do you actually need for standard subjects based on the school's policy for max number of students in a classroom. So this is what the charts look like in the report. What you see is blue bars. Those are the actual historic enrollments for the last 6 years. The green bars, the darker green bars, are the 5-year projection. Light green is that 6 to 10 year, less accurate projection. Running through those bars, you can see a yellow line. That will be what the enrollment would have been if there was no new housing. So you can always compare where are my green bars going, in what direction, what magnitude, compared with the yellow line, which is what they would have been without new housing. The broader gold band is that plus or minus 5%. So it starts out at 1%, moves on to 2%, 3%. By the end of the 5th year of the graph, that's a plus or minus cone of accuracy for that 5th year projection. The red bar at the top is the capacity. So when we add up in this one, the capacity is here, and there's a delta in between, tells you how much excess capacity that you have. This is your real pre-K to grade 12 projection, and you can see that according to the current capacities, you have a little over 2,000 seats available in the school district for students who are not yet here.
Mr. Sundell, could you say that one more time? You had walked away from the mic and the board didn't hear that.
So you look at the difference between the bars and that red straight line. The red straight line is the capacity. Now that capacity is defined from a report you did 2 years ago. It was another consultant did it, not me. I just use what I am told from the district is the capacities. Yes?
When you say the capacity, you mean the capacity overall for all buildings?
Yes.
Combined, not as though individual buildings would have.
Well, later we'll get to the capacity.
I know you have that later. And I just wanted to clarify, like that's overall
this
all
is
buildings
total
in the district.
This is chart for the total district, right? And across all buildings, how much excess you currently have. Now, again, I can't vouch for the accuracy of them. I was given that information from another report.
I'd like to jump in here for 1 second before we move on, because, and if you could go off mute, Mr. Sundell just said that we can limit the feedback.
Oh.
Thank you. So I do have a question, because I think that when I looked at this presentation over the weekend in board memo, this was a question that I had. If we can go back to the last slide. You know, when we talk about capacity, you know, this kind of took me by surprise when the thought of putting out a red line like this and suggesting to the community that we have the ability to entertain upwards of another 3,000 kids in this district does not feel realistic to me, knowing what we know about what's happening in some of our individual buildings. So I was wondering if Mr. Rizzo, you know, when we think about this is, to me, the way I'm interpreting this is the capacity. If we took away like all of our small group instruction spaces, all of our large group instruction spaces, if we were using every single space that we had available to us from a classroom perspective, maybe that's what this number is. But can you clarify like functional capacity versus what we're showing here?
I will. That was directed towards me. So yeah, Mr. Hermans, thank you. So we throw that term capacity around a lot because there is a capacity based on a PDE formula, which is any classroom size space that can accommodate, which is a minimum of, I think, 663 square feet, something along those lines. Any one of those spaces anywhere across the district, PD applies a formula of either 25 or 30 students. That number times the number of classrooms across our entire district is where you get that almost 11,000 number. that is not practical for us. Whenever we talk about the small group instruction spaces, when we talk about our related services, our special education classrooms, those all cut back on that capacity. So then whenever we did our presentation in June and we provided that functional capacity, that's really the more accurate number. The red line is not inaccurate, it's just measuring it differently than we have been presenting it, and it's not realistic based on what our needs of our students are.
That is very clear. Thank you.
So one of the things that are influencing the decreases in your enrollment is the fact that your graduating 12th grades are much larger, or should I at least say larger, than your incoming grade 1. We don't use kindergarten because it's not mandatory. We look at grade 1, and we can see a significant difference here of what was an average of 116 every year fewer grade 1 students than the graduating class the year before of grade 12. So that literally means that you were losing that 116 students every year. That part of the decrease was due to this factor alone. It's going to increase. It's going to go to about 181 in the 5-year projection. So that alone accounts for some of the decrease we're seeing. So we also can look at cohort survival rates and see that the elementary is higher. You're actually, more kids are going from one grade to the next one at the elementary level than at middle or high school. Another thing is grade sizes that we look at in the projection period. Elementary is smaller classes. They survive better, but they're smaller classes right now than middle school, and the largest ones are at the high school. Births are volatile, but they're only increasing about 2 per year. Every year is two births higher than what it was the year before. Not a lot of impact from births alone. And the population is aging in place. If we look at that same 6-year period, we can see that the median age, that's the one in the middle, is gone from 40 to about 45 over that 6-year period. You're aging about 1 year per year, 1 year increase on every year that goes down. So then we look at elementary, we'll look at middle, we'll look at high, we'll look at your 9th grade separately. So there's charts in each one of these, and you can see, again, the blue bar. I'm just going to repeat it one time. The blue bar is the actual or historic enrollments. Dark green is the projection for 5 years. You can see crossing through the middle of that is a yellow line. That is what elementary enrollment would have been if there wasn't any new housing. So everything above that yellow band is in fact the impact of new housing on elementary grade levels. And the red bar that we said may or may not be the one we properly want to use for the analysis of your school, but that's the capacity. And as you can see, there's excess capacity. For every school, we also put a year by year, grade level by grade level count by the standard projection. Gives you the actual for the 6 years, the projected for 5 years, and the extended for another 5 years. This is for every analysis that we do. So the middle school chart looks like this. Again, we see there's plenty of space using that capacity number. Grade 8, the same. All of these are showing that at the grade level there is capacity. So I thought I understood there's going to be some master plan work coming in the future. Obviously, check which capacity you want to use before you move into that sort of thing. And then finally, there is just a comparative enrollment chart, which you can see very quickly. Only the green line, which is the high school, has any significant increases in it. The others are either flat or actually decreasing. And then we also do each of the individual elementary schools. We've already done the schools for 8, for 9, which are just those 1 grade levels. They were in the previous part of the report. Now we want to look at the individual schools that stand alone. So we look at each of the individual elementaries. They have a similar chart. They have the 5-year dark green projection. They have the red line capacity bar and the yellow line that shows you where it would have been had there not been any housing coming in. Now the thing is, when we looked at that housing list, we also looked at where they were located so that we know XYZ project is going to put the students over in school ABC, that sort of thing. So that's why you'll see the difference here. There might be more projects coming in one geography than another, but they were accounted for properly in that way. So we have each of the elementary schools. We have a grade level by year also for all the elementary schools. And finally, we have that section count that I talked about, again, specific to the one school. What you can do here, looking at these numbers, is say, are the number of standard classrooms required increased from what they were in the actual period? The highest number is highlighted in the red. So again, we have those for each of them in terms of graphs. Limerick, so you can see that yellow line for new housing is right on top of the projection anyway, because there was no new housing coming in Limerick that was going to impact the Limerick Elementary School in any case. Oaks is getting heavily impacted. You can see how those green bars stand up far above that yellow line. That's a lot of the new housing is in the Oaks Elementary area. Same, each one of them is provided. So all those numbers and the projections are in the report. It's not something that you can grasp in one sitting. You need to kind of look at it and study it. That's the whatever. So there's a summary by the grade levels, and none of them, again, have a capacity problem, only one of the schools. And that is Oaks, as we said, is the only one that, according to the capacity numbers we're using, has a problem in the school district. And that's it. The information is all there. There's too much information for really one sitting. But as I said, each of the schools are done. The grade levels are done. You have all the historic information plus the projection, and you can compare capacities with what the enrollments are going to be. So I guess I'm going to entertain a few questions on methodology or anything that you didn't understand.
So thank you, Mr. Sundell, for being with us tonight. And again, if you could mute your microphone as I'm speaking, thank you. Thank you. So thank you for being with us tonight. I only had that one question. I think a lot of it is, stuff that, depending on how long you've been on the board, is not necessarily new information, but it's good to have updated, an updated demographic study. I actually wanted to see, Mr. Rizzo, from your perspective, because I know that anytime that there is a lot of data, it's really easy to data mine the heck out of, a large Excel sheet or a large PowerPoint presentation like this. But I would love to hear from you. How does this help inform the way the district is going to move forward with our facilities planning? Because as Mr. Sundell mentioned, Oaks Elementary, as we all know and have known for a long time, is a concern. But likewise, we have some important decision points moving forward as it relates to restructuring the middle school, entertaining full-day kindergarten. And so, with that might have to come some modified facilities upgrades. So I would love to hear from you, maybe to what's your perspective on how this is going to help us?
Sure, thank you. So a few things. First of all, thank you, Mr. Sundell, for the information. I, like a lot of people, love data, but what's more important to your point, Ms. Hermans, is the story that it tells us. So I think, and I'll summarize how it impacts us. And Mr. Sundell, if I'm inaccurate, feel free to correct me. I can handle it. Districts have a tendency to go through a life cycle. They go through a rise and a fall in enrollment. Spring Forward is currently in that point where we would be normally experiencing a decline in enrollment. We rise, we get static, and then we decline. Because of the new construction that's going in, it has slowed that process. That process is stalled, delaying our decline for several years. The initial projection that we had Sundance do back in 2022, I think, did provide us with a dark green 5-year projection. We are in the middle of that projection right now, and we have found that to be fairly accurate. So the process that Mr. Sundell goes through is a true process that is, we have seen come to reality. What does it do for us? Well, as we're talking about our planning, whether we're talking about redistricting or renovating or doing grade level reconfigurations, it shows us what new developments are going in, what the census is, what the live birth rate is, so that we can plan not only for how many students are coming to Spring Forward. To say that 500 students are going to be coming to Spring Forward in 2027 doesn't help us. To know where it is allows us to make decisions on, are we correct with our grade configuration? Where do we, if we need to do additions, what buildings do we need to do those in? Where do we need to provide some relief? And what buildings do we have that have some excess capacity that if we do a little bit of a shifting, we can maximize the utilization of each one of our spaces? Those are the big pieces that we're going to take away from this. That's the important information. There's a lot to dig into. You do have the report, I think it's 50 plus pages, something along those lines, a lot of things to sort through, and we'll be working through that. But this helps us. It's critical for us as we plan for our next steps. What is the wisest thing to do to help support our students in all of our buildings to provide either A, some relief, or B, increase the capacity to help us be a little more leveled off? That answer your question, Ms. Hermans?
It did, thank you. And at this point in time, I'll defer to the board to see if there's any comments or questions.
I have a question. So, Mr. Rizzo, do you think if we look at the utilization numbers and factor in the number where we know the given classrooms cannot be occupied for the normal class size and it's a small group setting or special education, should we factor in those numbers as well so it kind of predicts the actual capacity level? So you see the 11,000 capacity and we are utilizing 8,000, and there could be a line in between where the actual number that can be occupied is in between 8 to 9,000, so we can understand where we need to really focus. It could be multiple elementary school buildings, or various buildings could have the utilization constraints.
So I don't know that there's an actual multiplier, as Mr. Sundell referenced, when it comes to figuring out the capacities of new units going in relative to students requiring services, whether they special education or related services. We do have the number of what I tend to use the term functional capacity, what actually works for us. And then if you recall back from the June board meeting, there's this optimization exercise that if we chose to go that route, we could take some full-size classrooms, make those small group instruction classrooms, build a wall here, take a wall down there, different spaces, on top of whatever potential renovations, additions we want to do, to be able to create an optimized capacity for each one of our buildings. So I don't know that we could predict that, but I think we can follow the trends that we've been following for the last several years. We are seeing a rise in special education needs. Dr. Giambattista has spoken to that. We were seeing a rise in the severity of need, not just the numbers. So those things have to be considered. We'll do our best to project as well as possible, but for the most part, what we really value is that the report that we got 3 years ago or 4 years ago is accurate, which leads me to believe that as we plan for the next 5 years, we could count on the numbers that Mr. Sundell provided for us to make good decisions.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the board?
I have a question. It's not necessarily for Mr. Sundell, but I think it may be an appropriate place to remind the board and the community of the next steps in our master planning, because I know it did come up in finance or property, I forget, this month, about kind of, it has been since June since we had that workshop to talk about this. So Mr. Rizzo or Mr. Pellegrin, whoever, it just could kind of give us an update again on where we are and what we see, the next steps to be with this information and moving forward in our master planning project.
Dan, I'll take it first, and then feel free to jump in, okay, if need be. So the answer is, back in June, what we narrowed down was to either we narrowed it down to moving 5th grade down to the K-4s, moving 8th grade down to the 5, 6, 7, so we have K-5, 6, 7, 8, 9 through 12. That was where we narrowed down. The two options on the table still were full day K versus half day K, and what that capacity and cost would look like. And I think the numbers we threw out there were, if we decided to stick with half day K, that we would be looking at additional $25 million-ish of renovations and optimization. If we chose to go with full day K, that would be more along the lines of mid-40s, $45 million to do that. And again, those are numbers from the past year. In a few years, those numbers are going to change. So that's where we are right now. We did draft an RFP. We sent it to our solicitor for review. We got that back today. We're taking one more look at the draft. And when I say we, I mean Mr. Pellegrin, myself, and Mr. Fink. And then once we feel like we're good to go, we're going to send that out, establish a timeline, go through the RFP process to get somebody on board to help us with our facilities master planning.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the board?
Just one piece. Do we have assuming once the RFP goes out and we pick an architect, kind of moving into the spring with kind of nailing down when we decide officially which we go, what school year are we approximating this? I mean, it's obviously, I don't want to say that it would be 25, 26. Are we looking at 26, 27?
So the board has some options. For us to have everything in place, what I was told was that once we make a decision and we vote to move forward with some plan for 3 years. It would be 3 years later that we would. Now, some things we could do now, some things we can do later. But the question is, how disruptive do we want to be to our community? Do we want to, say, throw full day K in for 25, 26, and then move 5th grade down for 27, 28, and then, those types of things? We have to decide what makes the most sense for our community and what they can, what their level of tolerance is for change, versus saying this is going to be our plan. Here's the several components of it. It is all happening for 28, 29. Just be ready for it. And then we would communicate and plan accordingly. So it's really to be determined by the board, but I think a safe bet is once we've made the decision to move forward on some path, you can plan on 3 years for that to happen.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the board before we move on? Okay, thank you again, Mr. Sundell, for being with us today. Okay, so we will go back to our agenda, and we are now on section 11, board comment. So I'd like to defer to the board to see if there is any comment from anyone tonight. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no, but I do have one comment before we move on to public to be heard. So I just want to circle back on my board, my board comment, as well as Mr. Rizzo board comment last week. As many in the community know, as it was shared by the district, there was an incident at the 8th grade center involving a weapon, a BB gun to be specific. And understandably, it raised concerns within the community, and many were seeking information about the safety and security at Spring-Ford. So I just want to bring to the attention of those that may not have seen the work session last week that a very extensive comment was made by myself as well as Mr. Rizzo. I personally received a handful of emails for which I've responded to each one individually. The core of the message for each email has been fairly consistent, and that's really what I shared last week. But with that said, I do want to summarize a couple points. While I won't read the emails necessarily word for word like I did last week, I do want to summarize a couple things. Number one, I do want to talk about this board as a whole. I can say with confidence that this board is made up of thoughtful, well-educated professionals who are advocates of students. And I believe that we have a board in place that is deeply committed to protecting and supporting students. As someone who has worked closely with our administrative team that likely is sitting in the room tonight, I also know that they care about children and have the best interests in mind when making decisions in this district. Secondly, last week I mentioned that there were board members that directed some feedback to me about the initial communication, citing that they had a preference for the district to be more direct in the messaging with regards to the type of weapon involved. I shared this information with Mr. Rizzo, and Mr. Rizzo and I had a conversation, and I believe that feedback has been heard, as Mr. Rizzo communicated last week in his own board comment. Thirdly, I want to address a little bit of what I've been seeing in social media, and to be very candid, some of the accusations and the assumptions that I've seen, to me, again, I'm speaking as one director, feel very kind of just out there. It's a little troubling. I've seen everything from suggesting that the district has a purposeful intent to deceive and mislead families, to trying to sweep information under the rug, to trying to protect the perfect reputation of the school district, which I'm, again, going to speak for myself. If anyone thinks that I think this school district is perfect, they certainly do not know me personally. I want to address the misinformation because, especially when it comes to rumors about the incident, I want to remind the community that there is a student directly involved in this. And while I understand that the comments of a few don't represent our community as a whole, we are still at the center of this dealing with children who likely need professional help and support. So I want to be very clear, as I said last week, we can do multiple things. We are capable of working to ensure a safe school environment for all students while also protecting the privacy of the students involved. Those goals are not mutually exclusive. So lastly, as I stated last week, the district cannot and will not violate FERPA or any other law, regulation, or policy that requires us to keep a student's records confidential, and that includes the outcome of a disciplinary hearing or a disciplinary action. Those asking for it to be released, I have to say that you are not entitled to that information. And if there are people in the community that feel that this situation should warrant otherwise, I would urge you to go out to your state legislators to have that law changed, because as a district, we are required to enforce it. So that was the basis for the communication last week. But again, I just want to make sure that everybody, has the opportunity to hear this, because I do realize it's concerning. And I want to thank everyone that's reached out on both sides who have wanted to engage with the board or the administration and asking questions, or those that, wrote to me since last week and showed support for the comments. So I want to thank everyone who decides to engage with us professionally, because we're ready to listen. All right. Well, seeing as though that there was no other board comment, I'm going to move on to public to be heard. And this can be on any agenda, on any agenda item or non-agenda item. So if there's anyone that wishes to speak, please approach the podium with your name and your township of residence.
You just have to press the button. Yep.
Hi. My name's Deb Prodis, and I live in Limerick Township. And I hope I can have 4 minutes instead of 3 if possible. I'm here tonight as a concerned parent of an 8th grade student, and I'm hopeful that the issues that are spoken at tonight's meeting will be discussed and not fall into deaf ears. Not only is it my hope that these issues will be discussed further at a further date, but also have return communication to parents within the district moving forward. There are many concerns, rumors, and issues. There have been some serious behavioral issues and incidents that have occurred over the last few months within the 8th grade class, and I ask for transparency from the school district. I request increased communication, becoming forthright with any and all information, and an increased ability to know that our children are safe when they're within this school setting. I would like to start with an incident that occurred in the last day on 7th grade when a student placed his semen into a water bottle and shook it and sprayed it over a crowded hallway. Not only is this disgusting, but as a nurse for over 20 years, this is a huge biohazard body fluid safety issue. This incident was never brought to the attention of any parents, which also could have resulted in the passing of multiple diseases, including HIV or AIDS. Because of that lack of disciplinary action, the same water bottle incident occurred again at the high school football game this fall. Discussing that this only happened once, but a second time, is just ridiculous. Nearing the incident of the second water bottle, there was rumors that there was a gun at a football game. The rumor was never addressed or spoken about, neither confirmed or denied. No parent will ever know if this ever happened or was just a rumor. In October, there was an incident where a student brought a toy gun to school. This incident was also never made public or discussed in any manner. The student was suspended for 45 days and due to return to our school in 2025. Many found out about this incident because of Snapchat posts that were read by other students. The most recent incident in November was another gun that was brought to school. School never stated what occurred or what type of weapon or has been transparent with any information surrounding this issue. The information that was given was that they are not allowed to comment, that the authorities are aware and in control of what the student needs to be given a due process. When a student chooses to impact safety and well-being of our children, their privacy should not be the focus. Some information was given to parents that they need not to worry because it was not a real gun. The sheer fact this information was relayed in this manner was awful. Next time, if it was a real gun, should I be worried that someone will rest my fears or whatever excuse a school board comes up with or a school district comes up with? Maybe next time a real gun with no bullets can be better. Springford sends out clear information to parents on how to identify real versus fake vape pens. This is an extremely important topic. I'd also like to know there's a difference between real and fake guns that could be seen at our school. Hopefully we can all agree that at no point a 13-year-old mind would be okay to bring any gun to school, fake, toy, real, BB, or otherwise. At this age, children know right from wrong, good from evil, and a simple task of not touching a hot stove. If one could argue that there are specific issues within specific students, we should also argue what a disservice we are giving to the next generation. Clearly,
Okay.
issues...
Thank you. 3 minutes.
Thank you. And just to clarify, there is no flexibility with giving more minutes. It's guided by board policy, specifically 903, public participation at meetings. Anyone else that would like to make public comment?
Mario Pradas, Limerick Township. Just continue with my wife was saying. I received many troubling text messages a few weeks ago. The most recent gun issue, one major one has stuck with me, was from our son. I'm so lucky he didn't pull out the gun out and shoot me. How can one sit back and not be angry about this? In our opinion, there are two issues at hand, disciplinary issues that need to be addressed with more severe consequences to set a standard that these behaviors are not welcome in our school. If then these incidents are spoken openly at school, maybe students will be less likely to exhibit bad behaviors as they would be aware of the consequences. I understand that the actions of students cannot always be controlled by the district. However, the repercussions of these events can. The second issue that needs to be resolved quickly is a lack of communication between parents and school and how incidents will be addressed moving forward. And I have to say, like, first time here, you guys handle business very professionally, so thank you for that. But I think there really needs to be a zero tolerance with these policies, especially when it comes to everything that's going on in the country and our kids. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Good evening. My name is Rajesh Patel. I'm a resident of Partstown, but business owner as a Royersford Beverage in Limerick. I have some of my friends who are with me, who are residents of Limerick Township, Upper Province Township, Royersford, Spring City, etc. The reason I'm here today...
Can I just clarify, are you a resident of the district?
I'm not the resident, I'm the spokesperson plus the organizer, but the residents are here, and because of I'm the more... And again, I have done 3 events in this school district with their supports. And
okay, fair enough. Go ahead.
Again, I'm very thankful to the school district, and that's the reason I'm here. The staff who I dealt with is very professional, specifically Shane, Brandon Balota, Dan Maskovich. All those folks has been nothing but I can praise them until the cows come home. We had 3 events, one in 2004, last year across the street in the gym area, and this year we had in the Flex building. And it was a successful event, and thanks to the school district for providing us the facility. We get the participants from all around the community, like the townships nearby, and from 2-year-old to 80-year-old. And it's nothing but talk of the town by the students and the families. Elected official has been attending our events every year, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, does not matter. We are like bipartisan and non-discriminatory, open to everybody, does not mean no discrimination whatsoever. We are looking for some help from the board because you have the policy to have the time limit up to 10 p.m. and due to janitorial staff, those aspect of it, which I respect that. But on the same token, I can offer our help to rearrange the rooms or whatever to make it until instead of 10, usually it goes up to midnight or 1 o'clock. And we do not charge anybody any fees or anybody else for participating. So all I'm looking for some directions, what can be done to increase the time. Because what happens on Friday, if you come home from work after 4 p.m., have dinner at 6 p.m. or whatever, and come to the event at 7:30, 8 o'clock, because you have to dress up and like that. I can show you the videos of our event to anybody who is interested. And it takes some time. So if they come at 8 o'clock or 8:30, and then we are done by 10 o'clock, so we have to stop by 9:30, it's not worth it. And that's the reason we're asking for the time extension. In India, it goes up to like 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking just midnight. And any support or any help you can provide, I'm willing to work with anybody and everybody. And that's why I'm looking for some direction from the board. So I'm respectfully requesting your attention to this matter and contact for future, who to contact, how to go about it. Our next event going to be in October 2025, end of October. So I have plenty of time, but I just want to make sure I start early. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to make public comment tonight?
I just have am I allowed to ask a question, or is it only for comment only?
It's really comment only, but if you want to touch base with me afterwards, I could answer whatever question you might have. Okay. You can certainly make it here. We can touch base afterwards as well.
Okay.
Just, name and township.
Sure. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Adam, Spring City. Just had a quick, I guess I'm going to make a comment, but it's going to be a question. We can discuss it later.
Can we get full name, please?
Alberico. Adam Alberico. Is there a difference between if someone brings a toy gun, BB gun, or whatever to a real gun, is there a difference in the punishment? Is one handled more seriously than the other? Maybe is one expelled if it's a real gun compared to not? And would you consider adopting a zero tolerance policy, whether it's a real gun or a fake gun? I think someone said earlier here today, we know the difference. Our kids should know the difference, especially in 7th, 8th grade. What is right, what is wrong, what you can bring. Even if it's a mistake, kids have to know what they're bringing to school. And I think it's important for the school board to take that proper step of a zero tolerance rule. Our police department we have a phenomenal Springford Police Department. I'm sure they did their job well. I just ask that you guys may consider adopting a zero policy tolerance rule so you can do their job and help them do theirs. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will just reiterate what Mr. Rizzo said, that public comment is not dialogue. So if you do wish to have that conversation about policy 218, our disciplinary policy and how that's guided by Act 26 and PA state law, please see Mr. Rizzo after the meeting. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to approach the podium to make public comment?
I believe we have one more, Ms. Hermans.
Thank you.
Hello. Most of you know who I am. Wonderful to see you again. My name is Adrienne McGarr, and I am the branch manager at the Royersford Free Public Library. Thank you for giving me time to speak tonight. I'm just here to talk about a few programs that the library is running in the hopes that someone may find them interesting. The first, on December 6th and 7th, we will be hosting a Winter Carnival, which is open to people of all ages. We will have minute-to-minute games, character meet and greets. We're having Elsa and Anna come by so children can interact with them, take photos, etc. And we will also be having a basket raffle to benefit the library. Most of those funds will go towards our summer reading experience that we do every year. And then moving forward into January, we are planning to host a health fair on January 25th of 2025. The event is dedicated to providing health resources to the community, sort of a one-stop shop where people can find healthcare providers, different resources that they can leverage, and they don't really need to go out and search for those. They'll actually all be in one building. The first emails should be sent out today, before end of day, so they should have gone out already, to some of our local providers and people that exist in the community, so we hope that we will get a lot of participants for that. And then finally, we're just closed on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, closed Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and then we're closed early on New Year's Eve. So if you are looking for library services, come in before then. Thank you so much again for giving me time to speak tonight, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak tonight?
I believe we are good.
Okay, thank you. Motion to adjourn? Oh.
Before we adjourn, can I just ask for a clarification? Mr. Rizzo, you were able to help Mr. Alberico with what policy and follow up with him with next steps. Will you be following up with the other group about that policy and their next steps as well?
I mean, if I can get their names, I can respond to them via email, but at this point, Mr. Alberico wanted to ask a question. I figured I'd touch base with him at the end of the meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to be consistent in how people are able to know what the next steps to do, since it's not that back and forth. Thank you. I'm so moved to adjourn.
I'm sorry. So I'm going to clarify one thing before we adjourn. For the gentleman that was asking us about the use of facilities and the timing and the events, since Mrs. Deardorff, you did bring up how you can follow up any exception to policy, which again, I'm not saying that we are likely to make that, but if there is a desire to look at something, to please email Mr. Rizzo and myself, again, Erica Hermans, as a member of the policy committee. We can then look into that further, but that would be the direction for that gentleman to take. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. Have a good night.